Good morning and welcome to the fourth Idea Forum in the series Next Movement, co-hosted by the Presser Foundation and the American Composers Forum Philadelphia chapter. My name is Teresa Rogers. I serve as Executive Director of the Presser Foundation, and very special thanks to Dustin Hurt, who has provided all the marketing and technical support to produce this series. This is a webinar version of Zoom, and that just means that participants are not seen, but you do have the capability to ask a question and provide comments in the Q&A window. Dustin and I will be monitoring the chat, and we'll do our best to ask the questions on participants' behalves. All 5 Idea Forums are being recorded and are being made available for future viewing. We'll be in communication with links to access. For today, each presentation will be about 25 minutes long with 5 minutes for questions and answers. And we hope to wrap up this session today within an hour and a half. And so that just means we'll be finished by about 12:30 today. The impetus for Next Movement came from really a lot of conversations that I've had over the past 5 months since COVID hit. Conversations with artistic directors, development directors, executive directors, who shared with me both their struggles and their triumphs. And it did not take long for me to realize that everybody was kind of craving interaction with their colleagues in the field to uncover best practices, suggestions for technology, ideas for creative program delivery, and thoughts on the future. And when I took this idea of a convening to the trustees of the Presser Foundation, there was immediate interest to support our grantee organizations beyond grants, and thus Next Movement was formed. So 26 organizations answered the call for a proposal to present, targeting music educators, music performers, music presenters. And we ended up selecting 10 organizations to present at 5 Idea Forums, 2 for music educators, 2 for music performers, and 1 for music presenters. Today's session is, as I said, the 4th in the series, focused on music educators, our 2nd of the 2. And we are so grateful to the PYO Music Institute and to Wilmington Children's Chorus for being open to share their creativity and for working alongside us to develop their presentations. And so now, without further delay, I'm so pleased to introduce Louis Scaglione of the PYO Music Institute. He is going to share with us how the Music Institute shifted quickly to provide music programming and performances in the digital world. He's going to highlight the opportunities and challenges that arose from providing this music programming through technology. So I pass along to you, Louis.
Thank you, Teresa, very much. And it's a pleasure to be here with our friends and colleagues this morning to talk about and share some experiences through these extraordinary and most difficult times. Philadelphia, I'm Louis Scaglione, the President and Music Director of the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra. I'm in my 24th year with the Institute. This past season, we did have a name and brand change from Philadelphia Youth Orchestra as the organization to PYO Music Institute. That was one of the delayed things that we were supposed to do in March, but did not have the opportunity to do that at our gala, which was postponed because of the pandemic. And we had to reshuffle the deck and find a different mode to and means to launch our new brand, but we did, and I'll talk a little more about that in my presentation. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the PYO Music Institute, the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra and PYO Music Institute was founded now 81 years ago, beginning in 1939. And as it began as one orchestra, youth orchestra program in 1995, It expanded to a second orchestra, the Philadelphia Young Artists Orchestra. And then over the last 20 years, we've added programs as Bravo Brass, Prism Strings, our young musicians debut orchestra, and our Tune-Up Philly program. So at this juncture in our history, we serve nearly 600 students from 3 states, drawing from 20 different counties. And the challenges of moving to a completely digital platform when the pandemic hit was very daunting, especially for some of us who are not entirely schooled in the world of digital presentation or digital technology, such as myself. So our response to COVID-19, began in March, as it did for most of us. And often the times of greatest challenge lead to the greatest innovation. When faced with prospect of not being able to meet in person, usually a critical element for making and celebrating music together, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our faculty quickly shifted to online platforms to continue offering music learning to our students. Throughout the spring of 2020, teaching consisted of masterclass sectionals, one-on-one feedback, lecture series, individual learning with online and print materials, and small group instruction, all of a virtual nature. While this method was functional, it by no means was an ideal environment for instruction or conduit for orchestral education. Faculty commented that virtual instruction is twice as labor-intensive as in-person teaching, and participation and engagement greatly fluctuated between the various ensembles. In mid-March of 2020, March 12th to be precise, Thursday, March 12th, I remember it like it was yesterday, the PYO Music Institute leadership made the challenging but important decision to cancel upcoming concerts and in-person rehearsals for several weeks. We had put a 2-week pause in place at that time. Little did we know that pause would turn out to last for months and then eventually last for the entire season and progress well into the 2021 season. Each ensemble shifted to digital platforms, some pivoting right away and some taking several weeks. As an institution, we had no platform for this, so there was no platform for presenting or anything through the digital means. Learning content varied from group to group, but each ensemble ultimately focused on creating a capstone virtual orchestra project as a culmination for the season. Each student recorded themselves performing their part of an excerpt of a full work, and each student video was compiled together to form an ensemble. These performances were then premiered during PYO Music Institute's year-end digital celebration, an Evening of Harmony, which we presented live on Facebook on June 19th of 2020. The Philadelphia Youth Orchestra itself, the ensemble, PYO students took part in masterclasses with musicians from the Philadelphia Orchestra, which is what we typically do throughout the season. I offered a relevant lecture series of 4 classes on the first Viennese school, Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, and then finished with a more in-depth look at Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which was to have been performed this year in June as part of our 80th anniversary festival concert with soloists from the Academy of Vocal Arts and the Mendelssohn Club Chorus. Participation in these classes averaged around 70 students, and those who participated, and I should mention that the Youth Orchestra is 127 students strong as an ensemble, and so we averaged about 70 students per class. And those who participated showed an interest in learning about music history. Finally, surrounding the social upheaval around the death of George Floyd, which followed very quickly during Memorial Day weekend, and the growing movement seeking social change, I invited board members, Denise Valme-Lundy and her son, Aaron Valme, who's now at the Juilliard School, And our YMDO, our Young Musician Debut Orchestra conductor, Kenneth Bean, and alumni Nina Wilkinson and Ashley Vines, all of whom are Black, to participate in a discussion with PYO students on racism and social justice and social change. The panel allowed PYO students to listen to a variety of perspectives from Black individuals ranging in age from their 20s to mid-60s and career experiences, both in law, music, and education. PYO performed an excerpt from Aaron Copland's Third Symphony, which is the excerpt of the introduction, which is the fanfare for Common Man from the Fourth Movement. The Copland Third Symphony is a piece we performed back in February, along with nearly 80 alumni. So we invited 80 alumni to then also perform the segment, the introduction of Ode to Joy theme from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in his final movement. We'll hear that at the end of our session today. The Philadelphia Young Artists Orchestra, under the direction of Rosalind Irwin, who is also the director of orchestras at Drexel University, led 8 sectionals with unique groups of PYO students. These classes focused on excerpts from Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade, which they were to have performed in May, and specifically rhythmic execution and how to work with a click track in order to perform and record their own submissions for the online, for the virtual orchestra project. Ms. Irwin spent time talking with students about the value of using a metronome and practice techniques incorporating one. PYO students additionally participated in online masterclasses with members of the Philadelphia Orchestra. PYO performed an excerpt from Korsakov's Scheherazade in their capstone virtual orchestra project. The Young Musicians Debut Orchestra, under the direction of Kenneth Bean and assistant director Rachel Siegel, and PYO-MI faculty member Andrea Weber, led 4 weekly sectionals on Job Philip Sousa's Washington Post March and an excerpt from Sibelius's Finlandia. The YMDO performed the Sousa's Washington Post March as part of their capstone virtual orchestra project. Prism Strings, under the direction of Gloria De Pasquale, longtime member of the Philadelphia Orchestra and our senior artistic advisor for the PYO Music Institute, led the students in a synchronous individual feedback. Excuse me, I skipped. I should say, Prism Strings, under the direction of Gloria De Pasquale, and the young artist students sent individual recordings to their directors and teachers, Andrea Weber and Hannah Doucette, who are 2 teaching artists with our younger division of the Prism Strings. Students received asynchronous individual feedback as if in a private lesson. So the students would pre-record their stuff. They would send them in for feedback from their instructors. They also participated in several of Prism Strings' social evenings in virtual instruction. Gloria De Pasquale, in addition with Hannah Nicholas and Jim Wilson, 2 of our other teaching artists, led the older students in classes via Zoom, coaching them on repertoire such as Bach, Telemann, and Vivaldi. These classes were separated into small groups based on instrument sections to provide more individual feedback. Due to the challenge of sound caption through Zoom, teachers devoted special time to instruction on left hand and bow articulation to aid in clarity. This was a great learning moment, as we had found. Several string quartets recordings were also created to provide students with individual tracks of works that they were preparing. Students could hear their specific part as well as how to fit it into the whole ensemble, guiding them in their own creation of parts. Members of Prism Strings also received individual feedback from their sectional instructors outside of online rehearsals. Prism Strings performed an excerpt from Eine kleine Nachtmusik by Mozart for their capstone virtual orchestra project. Each instrument section also recorded a virtual presentation of concertos by Bach, Telemann, and Vivaldi. Our Bravo Brass program, under the direction of Paul Bryan, who's also the Dean of Faculty and Students at the Curtis Institute of Music, had been in the final stages of preparing their spring concert, The Glory of Gabriele, when the decision was made to stop operations. So when we decided to suspend all operations, we actually did that 1 week prior to their concert. The concert repertoire was inspired by the 1968 Grammy Award-winning recording, The Glory of Gabriele, by brass members of the Chicago Symphony, the Cleveland Orchestra, and the Philadelphia Orchestra. The students took the opportunity to learn more about the renowned musicians on the recording. Together, they discussed music teacher lineage and researched their own teachers. In order to find links from their current teachers back to those master teachers of those three orchestras from the time long since past. The ensemble also met several times via Zoom to discuss the music that they were preparing. These online classes featured appearances and discussions with several Bravo Brass alumni, so we involved our alumni in this project. Bravo Brass performed Gabriele's Sonata Pianoforte and Canzone Personale No. 2 by Gabriele in their capstone virtual orchestra project. The latter work was supported by nearly 40 alumni, so we did include our alumni in this. Tune Up Philly. Tune Up Philly faculty and staff pivoted extremely quickly, particularly in a relationship to the School District of Philadelphia. So Tune Up Philly is a program in which we have 9 different site partners, including the Kroc Center at Salvation Army, St. James School, the Mariana Bracchetti's Charter School, the People for People Charter School, several schools within the city school cohort, and 2 schools from the independent mission schools. So together we serve about 200 students in Tune Up Philly across several neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And it's really designed as a program to encourage levels of social change. So the Tune Up Philly faculty and staff, as I said, pivoted extremely quickly, particularly in relationship to the School District of Philadelphia. First, Director Paul Schmidt met with TUP faculty to discuss their skills and interests in teaching remotely. In doing so, he followed the El Sistema model of engagement before instruction. Only after building buy-in with teaching artists did he address how one might approach working with our students virtually. So this took a little bit of time because of the varied technology accessible to our students in Tune Up Philly, who many of whom come from low income families, and also access to internet and access to their instruments, because for a period of time their instruments were actually locked in schools and they were not able to access them. As you recall, when the school district shut down and all schools shut down after Friday, March 13th, everybody basically left their stuff in place, not knowing when they would have re-access, and it turned out to be a lot longer than we had anticipated. So instruments were stuck in schools for a good period of time. The faculty thoughtfully discussed the scope of their resources and abilities and what was feasible for both themselves and students and their families. Teaching artists reached out to their families to assess what resources each student had, including if they had reliable internet access and their instruments at home. Given the demographics of our students in Tune Up Philly, students come from low incomes, as I mentioned. They likely that both parents work and perhaps on the front line, limited access to technological devices, some with challenging home lives so that live instruction isn't comfortable. It was important to first establish contact with families to ascertain the level of interest and participation and the technological resources available to the students. Sharing devices with siblings, as an example, limited bandwidth and data services, etc. Students who had access to both their instruments and technology received one-on-one lessons with their teaching artists. Students who had been accepted to the TUP Connect program received focused mentorship and engagement with their music theory lessons, listening playlist, and conversations about musical pathways and auditions. For students who had limited access to the internet, or for those whose family situations made lessons untenable, students received one-way content from their teaching artists. The content included scrolling scores on YouTube, listening playlists, full orchestra videos, music quizzes, and written materials. Students could reach out to their teaching artists and submit recordings via the TUP hotline that we created, which we're creating equity for all students. The TUP exchanged jury repertoire for a Song of Unity. So typically at the end of the year, we do juries, and we exchange that for building a Song of Unity, which could also serve as a capstone project in which everyone could participate. Faculty and students chose to make an arrangement of John Legend's Ordinary People, which unites us as people who will need to take our future slowly. This allowed students to cope and identify with repertoire they felt passionately about in lieu of a pedagogically heavy jury format originally scheduled. TUP performed a site-wide rendition of John Legend's Ordinary People for their capstone virtual project, and I'd like to play that for you right now. And Dustin, if we have some time.
Coming right up.
Thank you.
My name is Ashley Vines, and I'm the site supervisor and a teaching artist with Tune Up Philly. It's a joy to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Tune Up Philly, which included exciting performances this past winter, insightful professional development sessions for our dedicated faculty, and our transition to online learning. Staying connected with our students each week provided them with continued high-quality instruction while also providing them a sense of comfort, routine, and a social and creative outlet during these times of isolation. Maintaining our relationship as mentors to our students helped us to lean into our community, make it stronger, and will hopefully propel us into the future where we can be reunited in the classroom and make music again. Thank you for your support of our program.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Smith, Director of Tune Up Philly. To provide context, our program consists of 9 site partners, almost 200 student families per year, and 15 teaching artists who reach over 30 Philly zip codes through a decades-long curated approach. We measure our success by observing our alumni placing into every audition-based organization and arts high school within the city. Our faculty's average tenure within the organization is 4 or more years, providing continuity for our student body. This season expanded programming to 2,500 implementation hours. Assembled linearly, this amounts to 104 complete days of partnership, almost 30% of a calendar year within Tune Up Philly alone. From mid-March, these operations pivoted to virtual settings, fracturing our year, student matriculations, auditions, graduations, a sense of closure, and our annual festival concert. Unprecedented times called for a capstone project that spoke to the moment by refining our model to distance learning and promoting a Song of Unity, John Legend's Ordinary People. Mr. Legend reminds us to take things slow, embrace our collective humanity, and to prepare our communities to address childhood trauma and working to offset learning loss. As an ongoing capstone, we present our Song of Unity in Hocket, a Renaissance term for sharing a melody between performers, community through song. This bricolage is a sonic tapestry that supports students where they are, be it instrumental, percussive, or vocal offerings. To learn more about how you can support our student families, please reach out. Thank you for the pleasure of your time and for your support.
this time we'll take it slow.
Thank you. So, how do you take an almost untenable situation and try to bring community together through music? I think that was a wonderful example of how the faculty, our teaching artists, and our students and our families came together as best they could under the circumstances to provide some level of closure to a season that was otherwise going along very successfully. In addition, we had many technological modifications, and in the early spring of 2020, SAP Technologies donated, and this was very fortuitous, donated 7 laptops and 19 iPads about 4 weeks before the pandemic hit. And we were able to utilize all of this technology. This donation could not have been more perfectly timed. And it allowed for a smooth transition for staff to work from home. Once the pandemic began, PYOMI's administration team quickly procured 10 Zoom accounts to allow for simultaneous meetings in classes. This became the main online platform used for communications between students and faculty. As each ensemble begins to use Zoom and to work on individual virtual recording projects, Eric Oates, our administrative director, offered multiple technical help sessions. This helped ease the transition for families and students learning in a virtual world. We discovered a few things about using technology. It's helpful when families were able to purchase a USB microphone, such as a Yeti microphone, or some other external microphone. The sound quality and lag on FaceTime was better, but Zoom was more useful for breakout rooms. Sound quality improved greatly by both teacher and students enabled an original sound in the advanced audio settings on Zoom. So really learning how to use the technology. And we did a lot of trial and error. Eric also developed a relationship with Accepted and successfully negotiated a favorable arrangement for our audition cycle. Accepted is an online platform in which you can receive applications and videos for auditions. Typically, we hear 300 auditions in the spring and fall term before the beginning of the new season. And we had to find a way, especially in the spring, to move to a virtual platform. So we had to create all of that infrastructure from scratch. Eric additionally crafted instructions and protocols for students and faculties using Accepted. So we have to teach both our faculty and our students how to use this new technology. And the best practices for students drew from lessons learned in creation of virtual orchestra recordings, from room setup to where to angle your instrument and body, testing your range for recording devices, etc. The spring auditions were at their highest yet during this new platform and process. So we heard almost 250 students via the online submission format. Again, the first time we've ever done that. The virtual season end celebration. So as it was our 80th anniversary, we postponed our gala, which was supposed to be at the end of March. We postponed it to the beginning of June. We had to postpone it or cancel it after that point. And we decided to create, especially with all that was going on in our communities with social change and social justice, to do an online virtual event. Instead of doing a gala, we decided to do an evening of harmony. And it was a 90-minute event, including elements that would have occurred during our gala and our annual festival concert series, which would have happened in May, and general ensemble festival concerts, and a rebrand launch, all in one program. So all of our virtual orchestra projects were compiled into this a 90-minute presentation, where we also had to celebrate the year end, celebrate our graduates, celebrate our student awards that typically are given out at the end of each year. And so it was a lot to pack into 90 minutes, but I felt it was very important, and my entire faculty felt it was entirely important to ensure that we have an end to the season, something for the students to say we've successfully ended this in the best way we could possibly do so, given our circumstances. As we look to the future, the PYO Music Institute has established a Board of Trustees reopening committee to help manage and advise our reopening. Lydia Ogden, who's a PhD and is chair of the committee, and she's also a health policy expert and in research as well. And we have added the benefit of James Bueller, who's a medical doctor, as well as Robert Day, another medical doctor, Trudy Hecker, medical doctor, and then several other board members. And collectively, we are putting together what we need to put together as far as policies and protocols for returning to in-person learning. The ensemble directors have been instructed to provide a 14-week virtual learning plan for the coming season, to begin the season. Typically, we begin mid-September, and then our holiday break in mid-December. So that's 14 weeks, and we are going to present a virtual programming for those 14 weeks, with hopefully beginning in-person learning again in January. But at any point in time, we can pivot to in-person learning. So we have all of this stuff coming together actually right now, and we hope to have those plans finalized within the next week. So I'd like to conclude with our second presentation, and hopefully a little bit of musical uplift for our listening audience, and present to you Ode to Joy by the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra and members, nearly 80 members of our alumni. Thank you. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks so much, Louis. Thanks for that. I'm going to just read a few questions we do have. One specific question that came through the Q&A, maybe this is something that we can follow up with if you don't know specifics. I'm curious if you can share specific software that you used. You mentioned a few for teaching lessons. The question here refers specifically to the ensemble recordings. Maybe there's ones that you used and which ones you rule out, or other softwares that you use for teaching and so forth.
Well, we have invested in platforms that are managed by other companies. So as an example, the Accepted, it's a company called Accepted, and they have their platform which they customize for your use. And so basically you license that software and utilize that program virtually. And insofar as we are looking at Google Classrooms, actually, we've been using Zoom. Zoom was the kind of the stopgap that we found to be most effective in presenting and providing our learning platform. But we are looking at creating an entire learning management system plan that will look at, we're almost finished reviewing using Google Classrooms. So instead of using Zoom, we would use Google Classrooms. Insofar as the recording, we had everybody submitted their own recordings based on the device that they had, and they submitted that through a Dropbox, and then our audio video engineer puts it all together. So this is technology is somewhat of my friend, but I am of an age where I haven't really embraced this fully. I'm not sure I ever will, but a lot of this is new ground for me. So I've been learning as we've been doing this, I've been learning right alongside. Fortunately, I have a young staff who is very well versed in all of this level of technology, and I can rely on them to guide and advise me. Eric Oates, Patrick Bailey being the two in our office that really understand this technology best.
Fantastic. I'm curious along those lines, if you think you've discovered any technologies or platforms that, when the pandemic hopefully is over, that you might continue using, programs that you might continue either because the technology is helpful or because it might, for example, expand your geographical footprint. Have there been anything, discussed as far as programs that you might continue that you've discovered as a result of this?
Yes, so I had asked Paul Smith, who you saw in the Tune Up Philly video. Paul is also extraordinarily versed in a lot of this stuff. And I had asked him to chair a little committee of our staff, of our faculty, in order to analyze all that we've done since March 13th to date, all of the implementation of classes through the virtual platforms, the various virtual platforms we've been using, and to pull together best practices, to also assess and analyze what worked, what didn't work, in order to create a master learning management system that will take us not only forward into this next season, but also what will be able to work once we are back to in-person learning, back to rehearsals as we traditionally have known and loved it. What about this virtual learning stuff can we carry forward even and create a broader curricular offering for our students, and both with in-person and also with virtual learning? Because with virtual learning, you can tap into resources across the world and present those resources. So my colleagues that are in Chicago or New York or Los Angeles, I can tap into them for a master class because we've now are really perfecting the use of Zoom and whatnot for these kinds of activities. So it's we're working on that. So the short answer is yes, is to try to find how do we carry all of what we're doing now forward rather than keeping it on the shelf until the next opportunity we have to use it again. So it's integration of the technology.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks for your fantastic presentation and about the great work you're doing at the PYO Music Institute. I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa, who's going to introduce our next panelist. But again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a privilege and pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Louis. One of the questions that Louis answered was, how do you bring community together through music? And that is exactly what Wilmington Children's Chorus also did. They're going to share with us how they found community in a time of uncertainty and used free, engaging, and high-quality resources to keep families and members learning and expressing themselves. So I'm here now to introduce you to Leanna Mager, Kimberly Doucette, and Philip Doucette.
Good morning, everyone. We're really pleased to be here today. My colleagues and I are here representing the Wilmington Children's Chorus, and we'll be discussing finding community and connection during times of uncertainty. My name is Leanna Mager. I am the Executive Director of the Wilmington Children's Chorus, or WCC as we call it. I joined the chorus in 2007 as a chorister, so it was about 13 years ago now. And I remember my first experience with WCC was singing at a rally for Barack Obama in Rodney Square. And there were thousands of people. It was a very intimidating experience, but I also remember feeling incredibly impressed by the dedication of my fellow choristers. So I've been here ever since. I just never left. I started as a chorister and I worked my way up to an intern and then later to a teacher with the organization and to manager of operations, which was a position I held for about 5 years. I just accepted the position of executive director a month and a half ago. So I am new in my role and I'm pleased to be able to offer a unique perspective to the organization as both an educator and a former chorister.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Doucette, and I just finished my 14th year with the organization and my 10th year as artistic director. And I'm so honored to work with such a dedicated team of staff, board members, volunteers, and especially our young people as we move forward together through this challenging time. For as long as I can remember, our choristers have said that the Wilmington Children's Chorus is more than a choir, it's a family. And when the virus hit, we knew that we needed to provide that continued shared connection for our musical family. So in the past 5 months, we've created a lot of beautiful moments together, and I feel like we'll come through this crisis with a stronger sense of each other and our organization as a whole.
My name's Philip Doucette. I'm the Associate Director of the Wilmington Children's Chorus. I work primarily with our tenor bass choir ensemble. I also co-conduct the youth choir and the mixed choirs.
So the Wilmington Children's Chorus is the only tuition-free community children's chorus in the nation. We were founded in 2002 and we're based in the city of Wilmington, so we're just over the border from all of you in PA. Our mission is to empower young people to change their world through music, and that mission connects us with about 400 young people annually. We're guided by our values of access, excellence, and diversity and inclusion. We believe that all children, regardless of their ability to pay expensive tuition or membership fees, deserve access to quality arts education. We believe that when you set high standards and provide kids with the tools they need to succeed, that they can accomplish really incredible things. And we believe in fostering an intentionally diverse environment free from barriers to success, so that children and families who represent a broad spectrum of American life experiences can gather and make music together. These values have guided us through this incredibly trying time. And we're very blessed and fortunate that one of our staff members is a licensed speech language pathologist, singing voice specialist, and public researcher on the topic of singing and COVID-19. So my colleague Philip Doucette is going to cover some of the most recent research with you all now.
So I'd like to refer you to a PowerPoint slide stack, which has been included in our materials that we're going to be sharing with you. This will provide a more in-depth overview of the research that is the base for our recommendations that I'm going to share with you today. And it also informed much of our own decision-making process as a staff and as a music-making community. In spite of COVID-19, being very new and the likelihood that it will take several decades for us to gain a deep understanding of it, there are a few basic assumptions that we can make with a high degree of confidence. First and foremost, COVID-19 is highly contagious, and there are specific risk factors that impact how serious an outcome is after an individual becomes COVID-19 positive. The virus is spread via aerosols and droplets, with research pointing to aerosols as a more significant mode of transmission than was initially thought. Now, aerosols have a significant implication in terms of group singing activity, and the unknowns related to this risk have brought the performing arts industry in the United States to a near standstill. Thankfully, a growing body of research supports the use of several mitigation steps. First of all, there's masking, which interrupts and diminishes aerosol release, and it stops most droplet travel. Distancing, which limits exposure to a potential aerosol and droplet source. Time limitations, time that a group spends together, and also size limitation, limiting how many people are together in a group. These both offer another layer of exposure limitation. Ventilation is important in that it removes accumulating aerosols within a group that's making music. And hygiene, the ubiquitous hand washing, cleaning of high touch surfaces. These are strategies that disrupt droplet transmission. Now, none of these mitigation practices are perfect by themselves, but in combination, they offer a multi-layered defense, which can be effective. In spite of this, and as encouraging as that may be, there is no getting around the reality that mitigation does not mean elimination. The risk of COVID transmission will never be 0%. So that creates an interesting challenge to each community. Be it a choir, an audience base, a student body, or a staff roster, there are unique characteristics of each group. So stakeholders within a community have a responsibility to each other to do what they can to mitigate as much risk as possible. Ideally, a community will collectively decide if such risk mitigation is sufficient to resume the activity considered after taking into account many factors. And these can include the level of transmission in the region, the risk characteristics of individuals within a community population, and also an organization's capacity to effectively implement strategies. Considering each of these unique factors means that there's no one-size-fits-all solution that leads to an effective response to COVID-19. Every solution will be a reflection of the community that engages in this process. The collected research and the recognition of the need for this kind of flexibility helped us develop a stages of COVID-19 response document for our organization.
So as Phil mentioned, we created an extensive document that was really going to allow us to move flexibly, be flexible in our decision making. And it served as the framework for all of our program decision making moving forward. So from March to July, when we were actively putting on some programs, this was our greatest support. So there's a lot of information contained in this document, and I'm going to speed right through it because I want to respect everyone's time, but I do want to point out that we provided a Google Drive folder with all of the reference materials that we're going to be referring to throughout our presentation. So you'll have them, you'll have access to them, and you'll be able to peruse them at your at your speed you're comfortable with. So this is our Stages of COVID-19 Response document. It's a detailed guide on program delivery, precautions, and restrictions. It was prepared by Kim, Phil, and myself. And there are a few things that I want to point out before we move into how this document serves as a framework for our decision making. It will be updated often. This is intended to be a living document. And so if this is something that you think might serve as a resource for your organization or your school, I would encourage you to stay in touch with us through our website. We have a COVID-19 page on our website, as I'm sure you all do by now. And this document, as it's updated, it's already been updated 3 times since we've created it, will be up there on the COVID-19 page of our website. The information and the guidance that has been provided in this document was compiled from a variety of sources, everything from the CDC and the National Institute of Health to the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. So we did not discriminate when we were searching for best practices. We just wanted to find people who were creatively coming up with solutions to some of these problems. There are 5 stages, and each stage includes guidelines for program delivery and how business will be conducted, a list of restrictions and precautions for those operations, and a list of prerequisites which need to be met in order to move into the next stage. There's some background here on the state of Delaware, that is where we're based, and COVID-19 in the state. Something important to note is that this virus is looking different state to state, and each state is having a different degree of success in slowing the transmission of COVID-19. Delaware is doing okay. There are 16,536 confirmed cases, and there have been 593 deaths in our state. Wastewater analysis in Newcastle County does indicate that the actual infection rate is somewhere between around 15 times higher than that. And as of yesterday, there were 29 individuals hospitalized. 7 of those were considered critical. Our cases are trending very slowly upwards, and our schools are almost all starting with hybrid the schools were allowed to start with hybrid instruction, but all of the school districts have elected to start the year fully virtual, some for a period of 3 weeks, some for a period of up to 10 weeks. And it was also helpful for our organization to agree upon a definition of the word safe. So when we use terms like safely, safety, and when we use words like safe, we have a mutually agreed upon definition of that word. As Phil mentioned, there will never be a 0% chance of contracting COVID-19 again. I tell my parents this all the time. This is like the common cold. This is like the flu. This virus is likely here to stay. But that being said, we do think there's a way to sing together safely. It's important to have that conversation with your stakeholders, because if their definition of the word safe is there is no chance I will contract this virus, they will not do anything for a really long time but sit in their homes. So WCC defines safe as having mitigated the risks to the extent possible for the current situation. There's a risk-benefit analysis for both in-person and virtual programming. Again, I invite you to look over that, and it might be a useful tool for some of you, especially if you're teachers talking with your admin. We get into the stages now, and each stage has a cute name because this was a very tedious document to put together, and I was getting a little bit bored, so I decided to do something creative. Each stage, as I said, has information on how programs will be delivered and how business will be conducted. You can see the restrictions and precautions here for fully virtual instruction, and then the necessary readiness for stage 2. So generally, some of the things that we're looking for are liability insurance coverage of up to $1 million. That's pretty standard, and our broker did feel that that was appropriate for the situation. Things like access to screening and cleaning supplies, sufficient volunteers to help with symptom screening, staffing for in-person rehearsals, materials, since we're trying to eliminate kids sharing things like pencils and extra music in the event that they forget theirs, which we know that they will. There are some location considerations if we're looking at indoor rehearsals or even outdoor rehearsals, wanting to make sure that we have the appropriate square footage, the appropriate air circulation, and that we are able to facilitate in-person indoor rehearsals safely and effectively. And there are some landscape considerations. As I mentioned, Delaware's doing okay. We are in phase 2 of the national stages of response, or phases of response, and we've yet to move into phase 3, and our governor has indicated that he might not be comfortable doing that for a while. There are no known hotspots in Newcastle County, and obviously we're looking for all of the essential elements of the plan to be legally permissible under Delaware law and federal law, and not in defiance of any executive orders. So these stages move forward from stage 1 all the way to stage 5 to life as we knew it, the day that we're all waiting for when we can go back to something that resembles normal for all of us, and we're lifting all of these restrictions. I wish for this day to come as quickly as all of you do. Something important to note about how you might want to use this document: the stages don't move in one direction. It's not that you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and then to 5. It's a very cyclical process. Children's Chorus is currently hovering somewhere between stage 2 and stage 3. We're trying to figure out what that's going to look like for our fall season, and Kim will talk about that with all of you in just a minute. But maybe we make it all the way to 4, and then we're going back to 2 because the landscape changes. Maybe there's a hotspot outbreak in Newcastle County and we're back to fully virtual. And so our staff and our board and our choristers and families are prepared to have that level of flexibility moving forward so that we can appropriately respond quickly to the ever-changing situation.
All right, so using that stages of response, let me fast forward here through, document as our guide, we've modified our programming to provide as much quality music education as possible to as many youth as possible. And while most of our programming has been online in the form of pre-recorded and live virtual material, we've just started moving towards some in-person interaction with a lot of precautions in place. So as we look towards our fall season, we are working on a hybrid model that will incorporate elements of all three. For our pre-recorded video and audio recordings, they are posted online and can be accessed by students at any time. For our performing choir members, we made extensive tutoring tracks to guide them vocally and musically through their choral repertoire. And our virtual neighborhood choir took a different approach. Prior to COVID, our neighborhood choir program was a collaboration with Opera Delaware that brought music training into local community centers for over 150 youth. Our virtual neighborhood choir remains a collaboration and is a series of pre-recorded mini music lessons from 5 to 15 minutes long with a variety of topics. We create the lesson plans, record them at home, and edit them with our own video editing software. It was important for us to make our pre-recorded materials usable on any device that a child might have access to. We also worked to make our videos visually engaging with photos, lyrics, diagrams, anything to bring visual interest to the lesson and help guide the students' learning. We also wanted them to be participatory activities, so children were actively engaged with the videos. We kept the lessons succinct with bite-sized portions of musical learning, and we worked to share the videos far and wide, not only on our social media, but also with our community center partners, school districts, teachers, educational associations, and more. And while you might not think of pre-recorded lessons as a community building tool, they do help a child feel more connected to the teacher. We also build in home activities so a child can do these with their parents or their siblings. And these pre-recorded videos can also help to connect you with new students. Of course, a major component of our programming since March has been our live virtual options. We've used Zoom for all of these experiences, from our performing choir rehearsals, our summer camp, a 5-week summer stage and social program, and discussion forums for our parents and choristers. Zoom rehearsals were our primary method of staying connected to our performing choir members. We held weekly rehearsals for each section of our performing choirs from April through July. And since we couldn't rehearse in harmony, we organized the rehearsals as sectionals by voice part. We saw strong engagement and heard from many that these rehearsals provided an important sense of connection. We also held a 3-week free virtual summer camp with 99 children in grades 2 through 8 enrolled. And we were lucky that we were very comfortable with Zoom by the time, and we were ready to use it creatively for this camp. We had 4 different staff and 8 high school interns who provided near-peer mentoring and vocal models. We used breakout rooms to divide students into smaller groups based on musical experience. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, we had 3 groups rotating through music theory, ear training, and percussion classes. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we had 2 groups that were rotating through vocal technique and song class, and a music history and culture class. And then on Fridays, we played camp games and had a final showcase on the last day. And of course, since singing in harmony wasn't an option, we learned solo songs. We had 1 hour of Zoom classes each day, but wanted to be mindful of Zoom fatigue. So we also created a wealth of activities and pre-recorded lessons on Google Classrooms.
Our summer stage and our discussion forums were a response to a need to create more opportunity for connection and community. Even though our kids were meeting in the structured rehearsals via Zoom, the pre-COVID free space of a pre and post-rehearsal time, as well as ensemble breaks, were times that our members used to catch up with each other, to socialize, and to just enjoy each other's company. And this had gone missing in a lockdown period. Tragically, the murder of George Floyd and the unrest that followed, both nationwide and in Wilmington, cried out for an opportunity for us to meet in a manner that allowed our members to talk about what was on their minds and in their hearts, with a group of peers that they knew and had a connection to. Both forums were a space in which people made the brave choice to express themselves honestly. The sincere support that was given back by the other members present was powerful to witness. These experiences have led to the creation of new friendships, the strengthening of existing relationships, important education opportunities in terms of building empathy, and a lot of personal and artistic growth among a large number of our members.
We learned a lot in working with Zoom, and we know that it's easy to check out. So finding ways to engage and enlist students was crucial. So you need to ask questions, take polls, use the chat, have students demonstrate for each other, and use experienced students as mentors. Anything you can do to keep them actively engaged. Having a variety of activities helps with that engagement too. We also saw great returns from increasing our emphasis on student-led learning. We gave our young people the agency to make choices, things like voting on repertoire. We had student leaders teach portions of the class, and we gave the youth the floor to talk and got out of the way. We fostered creativity by encouraging students to create and share their own art, musical or otherwise, and were amazed with the results. And of course, it's important to create safe spaces for sharing, listening, and responding thoughtfully. Even though we were online through all of this, we saw our choristers' sense of community grow through their bonds to each other, to us as their directors, and to their choir as a whole. Sharing information, even if you don't have all the answers, is key. In a time of uncertainty, share what you do know and communicate your plans. Allow people to share, respond, ask questions, and provide new ideas in discussions. Trusting our students and facilitating their discussions and their exploration, allowing them to interact and work things out, with some guidance, of course, has been very powerful. And last but not least, it's a great opportunity for our students to get to know that their teachers are people too. Share some things about yourself, even if it's just showing them your cat on Zoom, and let them see another side of you, that you're experiencing the ups and downs of life during COVID just like they are. While purely virtual performance options are somewhat limited, here's what we're doing. Most of you know about virtual choirs, where everyone submits their individual recordings, which are then combined to create a mix that mimics a choir, and we're doing that too. We've also had students submit videos of themselves performing solos and released it as a kind of recital video. It's also a neat time to do a highlight reel of your Zoom classes and other offerings so parents and others can see what you've been doing in your virtual classroom. We did this with our summer camp, and that video is being made available to you in the materials that we're sharing. So now it's time to move outside the virtual world and literally to the outside. As I mentioned before, the Wilmington Children's Chorus has just started moving towards some in-person instruction. When it became clear that no public performance of our spring concert would be possible, our choristers were understandably heartbroken. They had already given so much time and effort and loved this repertoire of music from the cultural backgrounds of Delaware's immigrant populations. We wanted to provide them with a culminating experience, and we saw compelling evidence for a possible path forward. So in late July, we gathered each of our ensembles for socially distanced outdoor rehearsals, which we recorded simply with our mobile phones. It was not a polished concert by any means, but it was our chance to sing for each other and celebrate the music that we loved. As you might guess, there were a ton of planning and preparation details that went into these events, and I'll turn it over to Leanna to share just a little bit of that information.
Yes, planning for this type of event was certainly a very timely process that we had to invest quite a lot of time and communication into. So we started with a survey months before the actual event. We really wanted to know, what do our parents want? What do our kids want? Those are not always the same things. And what are their concerns? The Wilmington Children's Chorus is home to a diverse group of children and families, and they have diverse thoughts as well. So we kind of ran the gamut from folks who thought, oh, virtual is overreacting, to the opposite end of the spectrum, which is, I'm going to stay inside my house for the next 2 years, see you when there's a vaccine. So we were dealing with a broad variety of folks and their risk level and tolerance. But surveying our stakeholders, regardless of their answers, actually led to increased feelings of ownership and subsequently participation. So investing time in this process really does pay off in the end. And we followed up our survey with individual phone calls and text messages to just about every single family. And there were some really interesting takeaways from those conversations. The first was that even with all of our communication, and we'd been doing extensive communication, there were still some misconceptions. Folks are busy, they might just be skimming their emails and not totally processing everything that you're trying to communicate to them. So communicate more than you think you need to. We certainly did. Of the folks who decided ultimately not to come, their reasoning was really interesting to me, and it wasn't singing related. About 100% of the people who indicated they weren't comfortable indicated they weren't comfortable with any type of in-person group activity. So it wasn't about singing. And there was about a 50-50 split among our high-risk individuals and those who have high-risk members of their household. Some of them came and some of them didn't. So that wasn't always the deciding factor either. So don't assume, and really invest time in those discussions. I found them to be very valuable while they were quite time consuming. And have a virtual option if you can, a synchronous virtual option. That was something that we just didn't have the time or the bandwidth to get together for these in-person outdoor rehearsals. Having a synchronous option for outdoor in-person events is really challenging, and we're working through that right now. But some families expressed disappointment that there wasn't a way for their child to participate. We just simply didn't have the time to kind of get that off the ground. So I would recommend you invest some time in that now if you're planning for outdoor events in the fall, as we are. The planning around this structure was pretty intensive as well. We ended up setting up our symptom screening on SurveyMonkey, which was manageable for a group of our size, but if you're working with a group that's much larger, you might want to consider investing in a platform. I looked into that, and they are quite costly, but perhaps also quite fundable at this moment. We utilized volunteers for symptom screening, and we had staggered drop-off and pickup times, so we were never running into having a group of children congregating all on the sidewalk that I was then worried about keeping socially distant. So staggering those drop-off and pickup times was really a helpful tool. I also recommend having a backup location in mind. We ran into a fun dilemma on the second day of our in-person events. Wilmington PD showed up and they started shutting down the roads, and they basically told us we had to leave because they were anticipating a protest. So when you're outdoors and when you're in the city, as I know many of you are, you're going to need to be a little bit flexible and have a backup location in mind. Some general considerations for protecting yourself from liability. I think they're helpful to cover at this time. I'm not a lawyer, but we did consult with several lawyers when we were moving through this process. So the best way to protect yourself from a suit is through good preparation and robust mitigation efforts. No matter what you do or what waiver you have your participants sign, know that you can be sued. We did consult with our insurance company. As I mentioned, we have about $1 million in liability coverage. That's standard, and they didn't think that we needed more. You should also consult with your state for protections for businesses. That's a conversation right now, protection against liability in the event of widespread COVID-19 transmission in the workplace. And we chose to have our participants sign a waiver that was drafted by lawyers, and we've shared it with you in that folder for your reference if you choose to use one as well. You should know that not everyone will be comfortable with the waiver. We had to invest time with people and talk about the reasons why we have that waiver. And it really gives myself and our board peace of mind and allows us to focus on putting together stellar programming rather than operating out of a place that's fear-based.
So after literally months of preparation, months of conversation, the big day arrived. Members had completed their pre-event symptom screening and they arrived to our outdoor locations. And these were selected for having a steady breeze and good sight lines so that singers could see the directors, but that there was also an element of privacy from foot traffic. Temperature checks were completed roadside before the members even got out of the car. And then singers were positioned in a standing order where they maintained an 8-foot radius from each other. Singers and staff were masked the entire time, and the staff used amplification in order for the performers to be able to hear us during the course of the rehearsals. As I mentioned before, we also had time limitations for the amount of time we had the group spend together. And if we knew we were moving into that, past that window of time, we moved to nearby locations so that the performers weren't sitting in an aerosol cloud that was accumulating in the event that the breeze stopped for some reason. I think it's also important to acknowledge the fact that we acknowledged with each other that this was just plain weird. None of us had made music this way before. Many of them were singing with masks for the first time. It was hot, there was overhead noise from air conditioning units, you name it. So we had to roll with those punches. But the kids were incredibly resilient. And by the time we were done, they were making some great music with each other.
All right, so I have a short video that shows what was possible after months of Zooming and only one in-person rehearsal. And there's a slightly more detailed video in the materials that we'll be sharing with you. Let's take a look. Polished performance by any means. We were very pleased with the results and surprised by how well it went with only that one opportunity to get together with each group. As we move forward into the fall, we are working towards a hybrid approach. We will have virtual rehearsals for everyone with the option of adding some outdoor in-person rehearsals for each ensemble. If choristers cannot attend the live rehearsals because they're high risk or otherwise uncomfortable, they'll have the option to Zoom into those rehearsals and remain entirely virtual. We'll continue our virtual social activities in the events of open mic nights and discussion forums. And the in-person rehearsals, we're planning to reserve some time during those in-person rehearsals to make video recordings of our musical selections, which we'll then release online as mini performances. We're also considering an outdoor caroling event. And of course, all of this could change depending on the state of the virus. We're going to remain flexible, like all of us. So while the fall is a series of mini projects, we are looking forward to our largest artistic project to date in the spring portion of our season. As we saw the passion and creativity that these times have inspired in our youth, we felt compelled to help them share their stories and their art. Together with our young people, we'll create a multimedia performance and video documentary of our young people's artistic response to this pivotal time in our community. We believe that this is their voices and their creativity that will move us forward as a community during these times. As we move into our question and answer portion, I'm just going to put up some of the feedback so you can read through that. But I want to thank you so much for taking this time to hear what we've done with the Wilmington Children's Chorus, and we're happy to take your questions at this time.
Thanks so much for that fantastic presentation. One of the questions that's come up is, as you were working through all these changes and protocols, what were some of the places where you went to for resources, or what are the organizations maybe that you networked with while you're trying to address many of the things that you covered in your presentation?
This is Phil. I think I can start first when we talk about trying to gain some clarity in terms of what our understanding is about the risks involved with COVID and singing, and also with wind instrument playing or just meeting in large groups indoors. In a way, it was a little serendipitous. My day job is in Philly at Philadelphia Ear, Nose, and Throat Associates, which is the practice of Dr. Robert Thayer Sadeloff, who's a leading voice surgeon. He's also very, very active in a group called the Voice Foundation, which also publishes something called the Voice Journal, which is an international, basically medical periodical. It's peer reviewed. It's published by Elsevier. And so through his connections with that, I was able to be part of a number of conversations that were happening literally across the country and even beyond. Many music educators, many researchers, many medical professionals. Of course, we all are very, very concerned about the risks that are presented here. And back in May, we knew a lot less than we know now. And in fact, there's a research project that was just had its second phase of findings, the University of Colorado Boulder and the University of Maryland, where they've released phase 2 of their findings about the nature of how an aerosol cloud is created by a wind player or a singer. This is very similar to some research that was released in the University of Freiburg in Germany. And then I was fortunate enough to be part of a consensus paper of about 18 authors, where we kind of put our heads together and said, well, based on what we do know about this and based on what we don't know, what are some mitigation steps that we think would be reasonable to employ to give us a sense of we're being safer rather than being reckless. And so a lot of the information from those several different areas, plus many other conversations, led to a repetition of those 5 layers of mitigation: the masking, the distancing, time limitations, etc. But like many other things with COVID, we may find that our understanding a year from now is a little bit different. So when you hear the phrase "out of an abundance of caution," I think that's driving some of the things that we're doing right now in terms of exactly how far do we decide to be from each other, exactly how long do we spend with each other, why are we banking on an outdoor rehearsal as opposed to an indoor rehearsal, etc.
Leanna or Kimberly, do you want to add anything to that?
Leanna, do you have any other information perhaps that you want to share about where we got some of our stages document information? I know you mentioned some of that in your presentation.
Sure, there's the list on the front page there that details where we got some of that information. I found the document that the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus put together to be really helpful. They had a lot of great detail, a lot of which is mimicked in our stages of COVID-19 response, about things like, you know, chairs not being curved but straight rows, and I'm sure they're updating their document as well. So they did a great job. I know that Kim worked with Philly Boys Choir quite a bit when working to set up virtual rehearsals and to facilitate our distance learning. And we're now in really productive conversations with our state government as well. Children's Chorus is working to provide the most updated scientific research to our state government leaders and our governor's team to make sure that they're communicating the most up-to-date information as well. Many government organizations are currently expressing some concern over singing, and it was important to Children's Chorus that we be a resource to them so that they're able to communicate up-to-date, factual, and relevant information.
Yeah, and if I can piggyback on what Leanna said there, I think that because we're in Delaware, we're poised in a very unique way. Because it's such a small state, the degrees of separation between us and people who regularly walk through the halls of power in Dover is much smaller than it would be in a larger state or a more populous state like, say, New Jersey or Pennsylvania. And so we're really leaning into the fact that we've done a lot of the groundwork that, frankly, they're probably too busy to do. When you're a public health director and you're trying to address the issue of a hotspot at a skilled nursing facility, you might not have enough hours in the day to look at an issue like aerosol spread and wind instrument playing or singing. So it might be a little bit bold, but we decided to, you know, use our points of common contact and a lot of persistence to just keep pounding on the door and trying to share this information with people. And we were very fortunate that people were willing to listen.
Great. Another question, I'm curious, you've done a lot of work with the gathering the singers and sort of those questions. Have you started to also think about what might be involved in bringing audiences back to performances?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think that goes back to having an informed conversation with the stakeholders involved. The way that COVID is impacting individuals right now, when we look at the data that we have, it is true, one of the trends that's there, I won't say it's true, one of the trends that is there is that younger people under the age of 45, tend to have a more mild outcome. And when you think about the fact that the majority of the people who are on stage in our organization kind of fall under that 45, in my case, just barely, that allows us to proceed with the onstage activity with one degree of confidence. But then when we turn around and we look at the typical audience member, that is a very different profile. And so having a conversation with those folks is going to be a little bit different. And in truth, the outcome for that might be one where we progress with a little bit more of a sense of conservatism. And we might lean into the idea of providing either an outdoor concert option or some kind of live streaming. And I think Kim might be able to speak to some of those things from a programming perspective.
Sure. We are looking at the possibility of doing, as I mentioned, an outdoor caroling event. So this would not be a very formal concert like our normal candlelight holiday concerts, of course, but we have a large square in Wilmington that would be available to us. We could have a small group of singers mic'd and distanced, and then have that be an informal family style event where folks could be socially distanced throughout the green area of that square. And participate in that carol sing, of course, masked and outdoors and distanced. But that might be a nice communal activity to have as an only way to have any type of audience in the winter time. We are looking at our spring program as being flexible. So as I mentioned, we're doing a video documentary, and we do plan on making a video of these performances, which we very much hope we'll be able to have our choir sing live, probably still distanced, maybe masked, it'll depend. But we hope that we'll be able to get live videos of them performing this music. And it will just depend on whether or not it's safe to gather a small audience or what might be possible with the virus regarding whether we'll have an audience at all. But either way, that performance will be videoed and then put together into this documentary style video that we're doing in the spring portion. So we remain flexible, but hopeful.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for the fantastic presentation. A lot of great info, a lot of obviously thought and creativity going into it. And congratulations on the work you're doing. I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa, who's going to basically wrap up things for us. And again, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that presentation. So much thoughtfulness has gone into your music programming for your young students. I did think I would take some time today as we close out just to share some information related to the Presser Foundation for our prospective grantee organizations, specifically as it relates to special projects. So we've made a couple of changes to special projects, and I just want to make sure everybody is aware of those changes. First and foremost, we moved up the due date for applications from October 15th to September 15th. This move does allow us to pay out grant funds 2 months ahead of schedule, putting much needed funds into the hands of music organizations as they continue on with their music programming. We've also added criteria for grant consideration, stating that we are open to receiving creative proposals supporting music programming efforts which can be realized during this fiscal year. So it's our hope with Next Movement and this series that music organizations across the city will be inspired and perhaps learn a few things and know that grant funds are available through special projects that can be applied towards your immediate and creative programming. So to close out today, a very special thank you to Leanna, to Kimberly, to Philip from Wilmington Children's Chorus, and to Lewis from PYO Music Institute. Also, a very big thank you to Dustin Hurt and our co-presenter, American Composers Forum Philadelphia chapter. As I shared before, we are going to make this recording available via multiple channels. And finally, please consider joining us for our last Next Movement and Idea Forum on Friday, August 21st at 10 a.m., where we are going to hear from Tempesta de Mare and the Philadelphia Orchestra. So thank you once again for joining us today, and have a great day.